This is the Roots and All podcast, and I'm your host, Sarah Wilson. Join me as I talk about all aspects of gardening with some of the top horticulturists from around the world. This week, I'm talking to Joyce Veheary about her fantastic Lend and Tend project, which aims to match garden owners who perhaps don't have the time, experience, desire or means to tend their garden, with gardenless gardeners keen to employ their green fingers. Joyce pairs up people who are local to each other, then sends them on their merry way in the hopes they will have a long and happy garden sharing relationship. Joyce talks about why she felt the need to begin the project, how it works, what happens when it succeeds, and why the idea is of benefit to whole communities as well as the individuals involved. First up, she tells us what Lend and Tend is and how it came about.
So Lend and Tend is a garden sharing project, and I help people who don't have gardens try and find a friend who owns a garden and potentially doesn't use it or can't use it any longer, and vice versa. I help people who own gardens and don't want to use them or can no longer use them. I help connect them and make a friend with somebody who wants to use a garden and can't access one. And it all came about 7 years ago now. Well, my entire adult life, I've just been moving constantly from one flat to another and had a little bit of balcony that I could have gardened, and then my landlord sort of turfed me out and I've had to move. And it's that kind of, I suppose it's what you might say is quite a nomadic lifestyle of continuously being uprooted, that I decided to do things differently in respect to gardening, because I didn't have any kind of permanent address for long enough. I couldn't really join any allotment societies, and the waiting list is ridiculous, as everyone knows, but you've actually got to be registered to live in that borough to have an allotment in that area. And by the time I'd kind of put my name on a waiting list, it was time for me to move again, and it was just a nightmare. So I just wished and wished and wished that I could just go in someone else's garden, and I said that enough times to enough people that somebody came out of the woodwork very kindly, and a friend of a friend came through and started letting me share their garden. And then I was, at the time, I think I had like a Tumblr page. I was sharing all my stuff on Twitter and the early days of Instagram, and other people were like, "Oh, that's so cool, how can I do it?" So I just started helping other people do it, and then it grew from there.
Brilliant. I've got a million questions actually that came into my head as you were talking then. There's so many different aspects to this. But first of all, does it operate just in the UK?
Well, it currently has a bit of interest in Ireland. A few people have signed up in Canada, Australia, and in the States. I can't remember which state. And although I can't sort of immediately help these people because I have no local knowledge, it is open for anybody anywhere to sign up to. Although so far I only have made matches for people in the UK.
Fair enough. So I would go on there and I would find a lovely garden in California and think, I'd like to go and tend that. But I guess that you have to find a patch match in your local area. But that's probably just the first step, is it? I mean, how likely are you to find someone who shares the same view of what a garden can and even should be?
It's really difficult because it's primarily based on a geographical match. So, for places like London, where there's a lot more take-up, and big cities like Glasgow and Liverpool, Bristol, Manchester, where there's a bit more of a take-up, there is a bit more of a chance to then curate those matches and say, okay, what are your aims and goals, and how many times a week do you want to visit? But at the moment, I'm basically introducing people based on their kind of geographic match, and then saying it's basically a friendship that you have to kind of build with each other. And I guess by allowing people to kind of work those things out themselves, you're giving people the independence to kind of work around problems, which is what you have to do as a gardener. I mean, if essentially one person desperately wants their garden gardened and they need the help, and there's another person that's so desperate to, use a garden and have the joy and the opportunity of being outside, I guess you kind of have to enter a contract of mutual respect first and foremost. If Fred, the garden owner, has got some prized rose bushes that he says, look, they're in my special part of the garden, I don't want you to go near that. You go, yeah, sure, okay, Fred, I won't go near that. And a garden owner might say, this is the part of the garden that you can have free reign on, this half of the garden. And then the garden owner says, the garden tender might say, well, what about all the veggies I grow? Are you going to pinch my veggies, or do we share, or do you want half of them? And actually, I've found a lot of the garden owners have said, oh, I'm not really that bothered about the veg. You can just come and do the garden, but maybe mow the lawn once a month in summer or something like that. So yeah, hopefully in the future, if I ever get the opportunity to kind of build a more techie platform, then people can start kind of putting more of a preference in their search, a bit like what you would do on, I don't know, Bumble or Tinder. But at the moment, it's literally like just trying to grab people and get them together who have the same interest of garden sharing, and then sort of helping them navigate the kind of pathway to how that might work out with each other.
Yeah, so you mentioned contracts. Is that something that you would encourage people to have between themselves?
Yeah, well, I have helped people in the past kind of draft up a template agreement. Some people have inquired, does it include an insurance product? Do I need to see a solicitor? And it's like, well, if that's what you want to do, that's absolutely fine. Great, go ahead and do that. But essentially, again, you're kind of basing this on a mutually respectful kind of friendship. And if either party, the garden tender or the garden lender, does something to break down that relationship and disrespect one or the other's wishes, then it just means that you won't be able to go around there anymore, or you won't let that person in your garden anymore. So it's really based on, really respect and just consideration of your kind of garden sharer's wishes.
Well, that makes sense. So I guess I was getting, one of my questions was, do you need references? But I'm assuming that you just would kind of have an interview with somebody and, suss out their skills from that.
Yeah, for the more tech savvy of the users, I would say, it's very easy now to do a quick stalk of somebody on social media and, look at their LinkedIn page or Facebook or Instagram or whatnot. And generally there is one social media platform that shows a representation of ourselves and that we are that person. But when it comes down to the actual trusting each other enough to meet each other in a very private space, which is somebody's garden, what I generally have mentioned, and this has really helped in lockdown, where I thought lockdown would have killed the project. I've said to people, look, first of all, have a chat via email. Then the next step would be to either have a chat by phone, and if you feel comfortable, maybe have a chat via a video platform like Zoom or Google Hangouts or whatever your favourite video platform is. And then once you feel happy to take the next step, definitely have a partner or a friend or colleague, neighbour, have somebody with you at that initial meeting. Because in the excitement of going, woohoo, we can garden share, you might actually mention things that you might want to agree to that you might later forget. And just having a second pair of eyes walking around the garden with you, or just having a supportive family or friend or community member with you, if it is your home and your garden, just having them with you will just kind of give you that confidence in meeting a new person for the first time. And I have said in the past to continue to do that until you're happy to go ahead and start doing the official garden sharing. But generally, for a lot of the successful patch matches, as I call them, the gardens have been accessible without entering a garden owner's home, and there's kind of been no need to kind of interfere with the lives of the homeowner and vice versa. But despite that, people have seemed to kind of made friends and have a chat and kind of get on well.
Oh, that's lovely. That I guess would be the sort of one of the massive benefits and aims of doing it. I was just thinking, is there a minimum size of garden that you could list?
Well, I got a bit excited when I first started, and I was saying to people, look, whatever space you've got, that if you want to go and borrow your neighbour's hanging basket on, the next door but one house from you, and they don't use their hanging basket, why not ask them? I mean, you might not need to, help you in that exchange, but if somebody's got an empty windowsill pot, if they've got a bit of front garden that looks untended, just if you don't feel comfortable saying, hi, can I have your garden? You could say, look, there's a garden sharing scheme. We can kind of do this sort of semi-officially. Would you be interested in garden sharing? So no, there's not a minimum size really. And for that kind of reason of accessing the garden without going through the house, I think a lot of people are more keen to share front gardens because of that, for that reason. And then there's the opportunity just to create a little water butt to collect water, or you could just leave a watering can of water out for your garden tender when they're coming round. There are little things that you can do like that. So really, there isn't a space too small, and somebody that's quite new to gardening and might not really have much confidence in growing things might want to start off with something really small, like a little kind of raised bed or planter that you see in front gardens.
Yeah, and thinking if there was a bigger garden listed, for example, would it be possible that there might be multiple tenders to one lender?
Yeah, well, so this is the amazing thing, and I just wish I could just divide myself into 12 people, because there have been people that have signed up in the past. One person in America, he was like, I've got 15 hectares and I would love it if a load of people could help me. And I was thinking immediately, wow, a community could create a CSA, a little market garden program in their neighbourhood. There was a chap that signed up in, I want to say, Somerset, and he said, look, there's loads of space. I'd love it if more than one person could do some gardening, because apart from the farming side of things, there was a lot of space to create raised beds, create like a little mini vegetable or a large vegetable garden. And then it comes to the issue of scarcity of space and the amount of need for that space. So in places like London, I am kind of saying to people, look, would you want to treat this like a little kind of community garden? And although there might only be like a 10 by 10 bed that you can all share, so if there's 3 or 4 people that could potentially think about sharing the garden together in a kind of community gardening kind of project, it just means that there's less work to do. So, whenever you're growing something or feeding or harvesting, you'll always see a weed. There's always something to do. And then just when more of you are doing it together, it just makes, many hands make light work, as they say. So in a way, it can really work with more than one tender working on a lender's plot.
Yeah, and thinking about the sort of nuts and bolts of it, if you had something like, I don't know, you needed some tools, or you wanted to buy some seeds, or you wanted to buy some new plants to put in the garden, is that an individual agreement as well as to where the cost for that comes, or who owns the tools, for example?
Yeah. So if you're lucky, and generally this is the case, that garden owners that can no longer manage their garden, who are sharing their gardens as lenders, you will find a absolute treasure trove of tools in their garden shed that are, going begging. And generally, garden lenders are of the impression that if someone's going to come and help them do a bit of gardening with them or for them, then absolutely knock yourself out and use the tools. But then when it comes to buying new things like seeds, bulbs, small plants, that kind of thing, then generally if you're bringing any plants in for your own benefit, so I would like maybe be planting some things to start harvesting to eat later in the year, then I think what I've generally sort of guided lenders and tenders to do is think about what benefit it is for you. If it is just going to be an agreement where you take all of the produce, then maybe you should expect to shoulder that cost. But there are lenders and tenders who split the costs of things, because they might be taking 50-50 of the produce. But yeah, again, I can help people have those discussions with each other, but really it comes down to what those individuals want. And everyone's absolutely different. So it would really just be about being aware of each other's wishes and kind of what you wanted out of the project.
Yeah. So I was thinking as well about when you were saying sometimes people make quite good friends with their lenders and tenders. Is it just about the work, or is there a social and leisure element to it as well?
Gosh, there are so many multiple benefits of garden sharing could potentially do for society as well as individuals. I mean, immediately there is the physical and mental well-being benefits to gardening, and having the access to a space where you can garden compared to not having the access to a space where you can garden. For the garden owner, potentially older, maybe isolated people, particularly in the last 2 years, just having a familiar face popping by once or twice a week can really kind of boost that isolated person's morale. There was something I was reading into in the very early days of trying to promote this idea, but generally where you see, for instance, a front garden that's dishevelled and untidy, unkempt, it will generally attract more rubbish to be thrown in that garden and more neglect and sort of basically sadness all around for the homeowner and for the people walking past that garden. And I think it's called the broken window effect. So in our neighbourhoods, where you do see those unutilised gardens that could be loved and could be turned over and could be, put to, productive uses and also beautified, there is the benefit on the people that pass by and look at that garden every day. There is the benefit for the homeowner to feel a sense of pride in their garden and feel a sense of joy of looking out their window, even if they don't get to use it. And that's obviously good for the neighbourhood when there's pretty gardens and house prices and all that sort of stuff. But yeah, there's so many sort of multiple benefits for both parties, either the garden owners and the gardeners. Not to mention, I mean, yes, gardening can be expensive. I appreciate that plants can be expensive, seeds can be expensive. But after the sort of initial costs, once you start in the habit of seed saving, as my lovely late friend Isaiah Levy used to promote, once you start the cycle of gardening, it doesn't have to be expensive. And after a few seasons, you will never not have food. And that's obviously something that can save households a lot of money, and also be good for your actual health, as well as your physical health in doing the gardening. I mean, those are the first things that I can think of. I think there's about 5 benefits there, but I've been told that there are a lot more.
I'm sure there are, yeah. But I was thinking as well, if you were working in a garden at the end of the day, would it be okay for you to just kind of sit down and enjoy the garden that you've worked in as well? Is that a thing that people do?
Of people I introduced a few years ago, and this it was a lady. She said, "Look, I'm not really good at gardening. I don't really want to do gardening. I don't want to grow food. Sorry." She said, "I just want to smash up some daisies. I want to smash up some dandelions. I want to dig out weeds and get sweaty and get rid of my stress from the day." And, I might want to read a book in the garden as well. I'm not really fussed about growing anything. Would that be okay? And there was a garden owner who was like, "Yeah, sure, come and knock yourself out. Plug the dandelions out of the lawn and feel free to come and sit in the garden on a nice day and read a book." So, yeah, so I personally am more interested in gardening for the kind of growing food, because I love eating. Who doesn't? But yeah, there are lots of other kind of ways people would like to use the garden. I mean, I'm not suggesting that I'm an events company and you could have a party in someone's garden, but again, it's down to the individuals. If the garden space is big enough and the garden owner permits whatever you ask them to do, so long as that you give the consent, or you gain the consent, to do that thing that you want to do, then fine, do whatever you guys feel is appropriate and permissible and allowable and won't upset your neighbours.
You could see a circumstance actually where a space was neglected and somebody said, "Look, if I overhaul this space for you completely, can I then use it for some sort of get together?" That seems perfectly feasible.
Yeah, absolutely. Why not?
Yeah, exactly. Are there any other kind of really successful stories that spring to mind of people that have matched?
Well, I mean, there are just, the thing is, I am just desperate. So lenders and tenders, if you're out there and you're listening to this, please get in touch with me and tell me how you're getting on. Because a lot of the time I put people together and it's really hard to kind of follow up on them and how they're doing. And sometimes I think, oh, they're not doing it anymore. That's a shame. Oh, well, I'll see if I can sort of put them back out there and get that garden reshared. And then I'll hear from them like 6 months down the line and they're saying, oh, yeah, it's working fantastically. Thanks. Bye. And that's it. But that's fine. I'm so glad, as long as it's working for you. And if it's not working, I'm happy to sort of try and rematch you. One guy got back, oh yeah, I'm a chef and I'm trying to grow some veggies for my menu next year. And a gentleman who was lending his garden was like, yes, it's working fantastically. Very good in my opinion. Kind regards. And signed off. And that was it. And I was like, okay, brilliant. You know, that's all I needed to know. So yeah, I mean, I do appreciate that a lot of people are shy and not so camera, interested in being on camera. But if there were any lenders and tenders listening and they wouldn't mind me kind of visiting with my camera phone, I would love to do some more video content of people that are out there. And I think at this time of the year, being winter, it's really hard because a lot of people are like, oh, it looked amazing. It looked the absolute bomb in July, but now it looks awful. Everything's dead and it's frosty. So yeah, there's that as well. So I have to kind of be patient and kind of flow with the ebb and seasons and changing kind of weather and, people's availability. But yeah, I think generally when people do get back to me, they're really, really happy about how it's going. And if people don't get back to me, then they've either found it too difficult or they've moved, or something has happened and you're not able to do it anymore. So then there's the opportunity to either, like I say, reshare that garden or try and get that garden tender a new garden somewhere else.
Mm-hmm. And how would people get involved if they hadn't already done it? How would people get involved for the first time?
Yeah, well, you can shoot me a message on any of the social media channels at Lend and Tend, or the easiest thing to do is to go on the website lendandtend.com, and just it's quite easy to see there. There's a do you want to lend your garden image, or do you want to tend somebody's garden image, and you just click on one of those buttons and fill in the sign up form. And I will get back to you when there is a patch match available. Basically, it's very, very simple. There's no, Jeff Bezos, Mark Zuckerberg kind of tech. It's basically just me looking through lists and phoning people or emailing people, a bit like sort of Still a Black blind date, but for gardening.
When I was thinking about what to ask Joyce about Lend and Tend, one of the first things that popped into my head was the question of insurance, and actually Joyce brought it up in the interview before I got round to asking. I know it's good to be prudent, but I did feel a bit sad that my initial reaction was to worry about what would happen if I lent someone my garden and then they slid over on my paving. Would I be liable? Of course, if you're concerned about that and you're thinking of entering the scheme, there are ways to protect yourself, to mitigate problems and to make sure everyone is safe on site, which I think most people would do anyway, even if they didn't necessarily document all liabilities and health and safety issues on paper. But it did make me wonder how many great projects that are of benefit to the whole community are shelved before they get beyond that initial idea, because of red tape and a desire to document everything to the nth degree in the name of arse covering and a lack of faith in common sense and human goodness. It's a tricky area to navigate, and in the event of accidents, we do need responsible individuals to be held to account. But I, for one, don't want to live in a society where we're always looking to apportion blame instead of taking personal responsibility. It would be really good to find a middle ground. I hope you go and take a look at Joyce's website. If you're not in the market for lending or tending, maybe you know someone who is and you can direct them to it. Thank you very much to Joyce and to you for listening. Dr. Ian Bedford is here now to talk about some of the more unwelcome bugs who might share our homes and lurk in our houseplants.
There's never a time of year when gardening has to stop, although the motivation to venture outside on a cold, damp and overcast winter's day might be lacking a little for some of us. So why not use this time of year to focus on any indoor plants that might have been neglected over the warmer months? Besides a bit of pruning, repotting and feeding, it's a perfect time to check for infestations of hemipteran insects, the sapsuckers, which are the most common group of delicate indoor plant pests, and includes species of aphids, whitefly, mealybugs and scale insects. Sap-sucking pests can cause serious problems to tender plants as they siphon out the phloem and progressively weaken the plant. Left untreated, they can build up large populations and will readily spread to other plants around the house. Despite large infestations, some of these sapsuckers are not easily seen whilst they feed motionlessly on the undersides of leaves or along the stems. However, there's often a telltale sign when a plant is infested, which provides us with the opportunity to deal with it. And this sign is the presence of little sticky droplets on the upper surfaces of lower leaves and on the table or floor below the plant pot. These sticky droplets are the excess sugars that the insects excrete whilst they feed, commonly known as honeydew, and often contaminated with a black sooty mould. Once detected, the simplest and safest way to control the infestation is by using a proprietary soap-based plant protection product that not only removes the sapsuckers by a non-toxic physical means, but also washes away the honeydew and the moulds.
You can download or listen to the podcast direct from the website rootsandall.co.uk. Please also check out my Patreon, where you can make a one-off donation or take out a monthly subscription to help support the podcast. Because if you enjoy the show, please help it continue. I also have a GoFundMe where you can make a one-off donation. Even a one-off donation of £1 helps, and I'll be really grateful for your support. So please go to Patreon or GoFundMe and search for Roots and All Podcast.